Blog Talk Radio.
Welcome to Nonprofit U, a forum where nonprofit stakeholders can share lessons learned and discuss the latest developments in the industry. My name is Valerie, Leonard, your host. I'm a consultant to nonprofits, and I specialize in community and organizational development. I work with nonprofit organizations to help them make a stronger impact to their clients and communities. You can find Nonprofit U on Facebook and Twitter, and I encourage you to follow us and to comment early and often using today's hashtags NonprofitU, Community Memorial, or Investing in People. You can also leave comments on blogtalkradio.com/nonprofit_U. The chat room is open, and you can post comments and questions. In order to use the chat room, you must open a listener-only account. Then you can find a link to open the account on the episode page. And you can also email me questions at consulting@valeriefleonard.com. We'll be taking questions by phone and from our chat room at about the 30-minute mark or so. The call-in number is 347-884-8121. But remember, if you're chatting, you can chat at any time. Today's topic is investing in the people that power the organization. We'll talk about the importance of building organizational infrastructure and the capacity-building initiatives of the Community Memorial Foundation. Again, we encourage you to call in with questions at about the 30-minute mark. You can start posting in the chat room, emailing questions right now. Again, my email address is consulting@valeriefleonard.com. And if you want to participate in a live chat, you must open a listener-only account, and the link is found on the episode page right beneath the chat box. Again, the call-in number is 347-884-8121. Nonprofit and community development professionals, as well as policymakers, are especially encouraged to call in and share your stories and strategies. Today's guest is Tom Fuechtmann, a program officer at Community Memorial Foundation. Tom has served as a program officer with CMF since 2001. In that time, he has directed two of the Foundation's strategic initiatives: the Youth Initiative, aimed at improving health among young people aged 6 to 18, and more recently, the Building Organizational Effectiveness Initiative, aimed at building the organizational capacity of CMF's grantees. Tom has given presentations at local, regional, and national conferences on grant making and nonprofit capacity building. Tom has a Bachelor of Arts degree in psychology from Loyola University, Chicago, and a master's degree from the School of Social Service Administration at the University of Chicago. So thank you so much, Tom, for being a guest on today's show. Before we get started, can you tell us a little bit about Community Memorial Foundation and how you came to work with them?
Sure, and thank you for inviting me to be part of this conversation. Community Memorial Foundation, we are what's called a health conversion foundation. We were created from the sale of LaGrange Memorial Hospital back in 1995. So as you know, Valerie, anytime a nonprofit is sold to a for-profit, you have to do something with the money, with the assets. And in 1995, LaGrange Hospital was a community-based hospital, a nonprofit, that was sold to the Columbia Group, and out of that sale, they created our foundation. So our mission is to improve the health and well-being of those who live and work in 27 communities in the western suburbs of Chicago. And our vision, our bold vision, is together with the community to transform our region, that is those 27 communities, into the healthiest region in the country. And we do that through providing program grants. Anyone who feels they can help us meet our mission and vision can come in and ask for money for their programs. We also offer several strategic initiatives. We have a initiative that's primarily geared toward improving access to primary and behavioral health care. And we also have a capacity building initiative that you mentioned that is aimed at improving the organizational effectiveness of our grantee partners.
Awesome. And also, before we get started, capacity building. We were talking a little bit before we came on the air that capacity building means a lot of different things, and it means different things to different people. So just so we're all on the same page, when you talk about capacity building, what do you mean for today's show?
Yeah, and that's a really good question. I was at a convening of funders a couple of weeks ago when we were all talking about how capacity building has become this jargony term that has almost lost its meaning in some contexts because it's so overused. Traditionally speaking, capacity building refers to a whole bunch of activities that are all designed to improve and enhance a nonprofit's ability to achieve its mission. So basically, it's about helping nonprofits get stuff done, and specifically helping them advance their mission into the future. Now, that can get a little confusing because sometimes capacity building could be a noun, sometimes it can be a verb, sometimes it can be an adverb, an adjective. So basically, and some are even beginning to say that we should drop the words capacity building altogether and move to, a new term like organizational strengthening, which kind of gets at a little bit what we're about. Essentially, and we operate, too, on multiple levels. So sometimes are we talking about capacity building for individuals, for organizations, or for an entire sector or group of organizations or a coalition? Essentially, and we work at all of those levels, but we're looking at helping organizations and individuals in those organizations move to the next level of their development so that they can achieve their missions. And thus, by helping them achieve their missions, that helps us as a foundation move forward on our mission as well.
Now, question for you. Do you see the trend for capacity building on the uptick or the downtick or just pretty much flat? And I guess maybe from two perspectives, one from the organizational perspective and then one from the funder's perspective. It may have different trends.
Yeah, and I do think that it is on the uptick. And I think, 20 years ago or so, 15 years ago, even 10 years ago, this was talked about, but there was nowhere near as much of an emphasis, certainly from the funder perspective, on capacity building and on, strengthening organizations. I think there is a growing realization and acceptance that if we want programmatic outcomes, if we want organizations to succeed, in their work in helping others, if you will, that we need to pay attention to the organizational infrastructure. We need to help people improve their organizations. And I think even now there's a growing acceptance that also means investing in people. So, if we believe that we want organizations to succeed, that's going to take investing in people and in leaders, because we firmly believe that leaders are what help an organization thrive, not just survive. And that if we're going to really fuel social change, we need to invest in organizations. And if we're going to strengthen organizations and provide them with what they need to succeed, that means investing in people.
Okay, and that's a great segue to the next question, and then in some ways you've answered part of it, but I'm going to ask it anyway. Foundations agree that capacity building is important, but from my personal observation, very few grant-making organizations seem to invest as heavily in capacity building as a standalone program as you do. And when I say you, I'm talking about the Community Memorial Foundation. And the focus for many foundations seems to be on direct programs, but as you mentioned before, there seems to be a trend too in capacity building. But for Community Memorial Foundation, what drives the decision to actually prioritize capacity building?
Yeah, so I should say that, our foundation, Community Memorial Foundation, has had an emphasis on capacity building really since its inception. So while, others or some funders are kind of coming to this realization that it's important, we have been blessed by a board and by, staff who have right from our beginnings understood that, this is a really important part of our work. And part of that, I think, is, due to the fact of who we are and where we exist in the world, and that we fund a very defined geographic area, 27 suburbs in the western suburbs of Chicago. And, so we really want, our partners and our potential partners, the nonprofits that serve the residents in our communities, to be as strong as they can be. Because by having strong partners, then we will be able to fund programs that really, improve health in our communities. So if you call it enlightened self-interest or whatever you call it, that is really how I think our firm commitment to capacity building, really began is out of an understanding that, we need strong partners and we need strong organizations in our communities if we're going to move our mission forward. But getting to the point of your question, you're right. I mean, there was some research done by an organization that I'm connected to called Fund the People that looked at, looked at research that showed that over 20 years, from 1992 to 2011, foundations devoted 1% or less of their grant dollars to support nonprofit talent development. So, this has not been a large portion of folks' budget. This, capacity building, and certainly capacity building with an emphasis on leadership development or talent development. I do think that's beginning to change as people see that leadership is and investing in people is really important. But traditionally speaking, no, this has not been a major area of foundation's work. It has been a part of our work and a significant part of our work, and I think the answer to that is in part because of kind of who we are and where we came from.
Yeah, that's interesting. I didn't realize the percentage was so small. So it sounds to me like more investment has been in overhead than in capacity building in organizations. Oh, wow.
Yeah, and again,
that's
capacity building can take a lot of forms, right? And not to say that, talent investment or investing in people is the only or even the best form of capacity building, but it's a critically important form of capacity building support, and it's not an area that has, at least traditionally in the recent past, received a lot of grant dollars.
Okay, I got you. So you are making the distinction between investing in people development, talent development versus the whole spectrum of capacity building.
Right, and we do the other spectrum stuff too. I mean, funding an organization to hire a consultant to do a strategic plan, that's capacity building. I mean, that's, providing a valuable service that strengthens the organization. It's not, though, executive coaching or HR support or, a leadership development program, which is really focused on talent development and, building capacity within individuals that fuel the organization and move the mission forward.
Okay, and that's very important because everything rises and falls on leadership. Is that correct?
Sure, yeah.
Okay,
absolutely.
I noticed too that Community Memorial Foundation provides funding for grantees to engage in self-assessment. For example, they can do a survey or they can do an in-depth organizational assessment and action planning program. So how does this initiative work?
Right. So and another piece of work that we do is technical assistance grants, which I just mentioned. We provide grants, small grants of up to $15,000 to hire a consultant to do a particular capacity building activity like strategic planning or board development or a feasibility study, those kinds of things. And we emphasize assessment kind of at the beginning of those projects because we want to be on the same page, us, the foundation, and the grantee, about what the greatest capacity building need is, and really have an in-depth understanding of not only what their greatest needs are, but their ability and their readiness really to take on capacity building work as an organization. So one of the ways that we do that is through providing assessments. And so we've worked with the TCC group that has what they call the Core Capacity Assessment Tool, or CCAT. It's an online organizational assessment tool that can be conducted, facilitated online with, key paid and unpaid leaders within the organization, that provides basically a snapshot of, where the organization is on an organizational life cycle model in terms of their development, and some suggestions about what next steps they might take to move to the next level in their development. And we found that, and other tools, there's a lot of tools out there, but the important piece is it's really important when you're thinking about a capacity building, embarking on a capacity building program or strategy, to really have a keen understanding of, your ability and your need and your ability and your readiness to take on that kind of project. And that's where, we have used assessments, both the CCAT and also, more in-depth, assessment process through kind of a consultant who will go in and, look at all the major functions of the organization and provide the organization with a report. These kinds of assessments can be very helpful in helping, organizations and foundations really understand, their capacity and their ability to take on, a new capacity building project, and what's the best direction they should take.
Yeah, it's interesting. I listened to you talk. Sounds to me that not only should organizations engage in capacity building activities, but when you do your assessment of the organization, you're also looking at their ability to actually successfully engage in capacity building activities. Is that true?
Absolutely. I mean, we see assessment and that whole, application process for capacity building support as really looking at an organization's readiness to engage in this work, and what is the best thing that would move them forward, and why, essentially. So it's, for us, it's also in the context of a relationship. I mean, it's assessment and all of these things is part of, in the context of the relationship that we have with the grantee, because we want to help them be as strong as they can be so they can advance their mission and by extension help us move our mission forward. But readiness and ability and desire to take on this kind of organizational change work is really important. Otherwise, it's not going to succeed. So, I mean, for example, as part of the capacity building applications for organizational assessment and for technical assistance grants, we ask about the board's involvement and their commitment. And so there has to be, a commitment from the board. I mean, say if you're doing a strategic planning process, I mean, some of the questions we'll ask is, how has the board been engaged? Is there a steering committee made up of board members that's helping guide this process? And what's the financial commitment on the part of the board and the organization as well? I mean, typically we would fund part of a capacity building project, but not all of it. So if you were asking us for funding for, a strategic plan, we want to know what the organizational commitment is as well, because that kind of commitment not only shows, that you're invested as an organization, but it shows that there's buy-in from this the most senior leadership of the organization, and that will only strengthen the program over time.
Oh, okay. So you basically want to make sure the organization has some skin in the game for their capacity building activities, and I guess the program officer who's dealing with direct service, would focus on direct service. Is that how that works?
Yeah, and we want to make sure that that there's alignment with what the actual needs of the organization are. So, for example, often we're asked to support development work, but that may not be the biggest need. It might be that they need, a strategic plan, or it might mean that they need, some board development work prior to any of, development consulting, for example. So, and an assessment an organizational assessment, hopefully, if done well, will really highlight, where the organization is in its organizational development and what its greatest capacity building needs are, so that, we can design a capacity building set of activities, whether that be leadership development, executive coaching, a consultant to help them with a particular task, HR support, that will really help the organization move to the next level and be able to sustain itself over time. And so, all of that is in the context of, what are you as an organization really ready to take on at this point? Where are you in your development as a nonprofit? And then designing those strategies to say, kind of, how can we move you to the next level, or how can we help you, walk with you in this journey as you kind of move to the next level in your development.
Okay, so realizing that no two organizations are alike, how long would you say a typical capacity building engagement lasts, one that you would be involved in as a funder?
So that's highly dependent on what we're talking about. So we provide executive coaching, for example, that is a strategy that works with the executive director, a very kind of intense and personal engagement that's a year-long program, where we provide a year of support for the executive director. If you're talking about our HR program, which we'll talk about in a little bit, I think, that's a year-long program as well. Our leadership development work is a 16-month program. And then if you're talking about a regular technical assistance grant, strategic plans can last anywhere from several months to a full year. Same with evaluation programs and products and things like that.
Okay. So it sounds to me like you're ready to make a significant commitment in terms of time working with the organizations, realizing that this is a developmental process.
Absolutely. Yep.
Okay, great.
And I think it has to be. I think it has to be an investment of time. We're talking about, working with, and we're talking about organizations and individuals that we're in relationship with, that, we want to see succeed, because when they succeed and when they're strong, our communities will be healthier as a result. They'll be able to move their mission forward. And as a result, our communities will be healthier, which is what our mission is all about. So, of course, I think it takes time, and it takes, you need to be in it for the long haul if you're going to do this. And I would say that to any funder out there. If you're going to commit to capacity building, first of all, I think you should, because I don't know how you have successful programs if you're not also attending to the organizations and the individuals that are engaged in this social change work. But be ready to be in it for the long haul, because that's what it takes to really help organizations succeed.
Now, it's interesting that you bring that point up. I can remember when I was an executive director of an organization, a really emerging organization, and we were doing a spinoff, and I felt like we were spinning off under duress. Our parents, so to speak, they gave us funds for a strategic plan, but they wanted us to have it done, I think, within 2 months' time, like 8 weeks, less than 10 weeks. And we got her done, so to speak.
Right.
But this was a group of folks in North Lawndale. We had limited capacity within our own, to really sustain the organization. And, like I said, we finished everything, but I don't feel that was a good approach, because the results were not sustainable, if that makes sense. We had a beautifully written strategic plan, but I don't think we were mentally ready. I don't think we were financially ready and all that good stuff. But we got it.
And was this process driven by the funder or by your parent organization? Yeah.
The
and
funder,
there's a lot
who was our parent. Mm-hmm.
Right. And there's a lot written about that, and it's a kind of a very hot topic among foundations in the funder world that support capacity building or organizational strengthening work is this dance between grantee-led and funder-led work, right? And I would just say that when funders dictate or mandate capacity building work, in my experience and in my opinion, the likelihood that things will not go as well as you hope them to is pretty high. I mean, so all of our capacity building programs and activities started with a conversation or an observation or a survey, some understanding of what is going on with our grantees. And so, it's always kind of looking at what our grantees need to be successful. And so, that comes from, again, it comes from the relationship and having strong relationships with those who we work with, to kind of really have a deep understanding of what they need to be able to be more successful in their work. And, out of that grew our executive coaching program, and out of that grew our HR program, because these were needs that, we heard very clearly expressed by our grantee partners. So it wasn't us saying, you have to do this or you're not going to get money. It was more like, we've noticed that this is going on, and you've told us in surveys and in conversations and focus groups that you really need assistance with HR, or that, executive directors are turning over at an exceptionally high rate. Maybe there's something we could do to support them so they're not so isolated, and so that they have a resource and a thought partner and an accountability partner outside of their board that could help them succeed in their very difficult jobs. So all of the programs and interventions and activities that we provide really come from, again, conversations or focus groups or surveys or things that we've done, with our grantees in response to what they've told us. And I think that's kind of a key thing, a key learning that we've had that I would, share with any other funders that are on the call, to say, if you want to design a successful capacity building program, at some point you really have to be grantee driven. And really respond to what the needs are of the grantees, rather than kind of forcing folks into, a particular program, because that's just honestly probably not going to work.
Right. It didn't last very long,
Right.
And that's all.
Yeah.
That's all I'll say there.
Yeah, I know. And we all have those stories. Yeah. Right. Yeah.
Okay. I want to remind our listening audience that you're listening to Nonprofit U, and we're speaking with Tom Fuechtmann. Tom is the Senior Program Officer with the Community Memorial Foundation. We'll take questions from our listening audience very, very shortly, so feel free to give us a call. That number is 773. That's such a horrible habit, 347-884-8121. Again, that number is 347-884-8121. And if you're in our chat room, we will also take questions from our chat room. And remember, in order to use the chat room, you have to open a listener-only account. And I am very, very happy to see J.P. Paulus. He is the principal with Do-Gooder Consulting. And he has a question. He says, one of my questions is, how do we get organizations to the table to take advantage of things like capacity training And are there types of individuals in an organization that should be called upon? So that's the first of his questions.
Okay, so how do we get folks to the table? I will confess that it's pretty easy for me to do that as a funder because I have, we have about 70 grantees, and we say we're, doing this training on, succession planning, and we're bringing in a national thought leader on this topic, or board development, and we're bringing in board source, and kind of we put out an email, and we have 80 people show up. So I'm well aware of the power dynamic that makes that happen. So I guess I struggle with, as a consultant, how you do that. Let me just say this. I think, generally speaking, most nonprofit folks that I've come in contact with really have a deep desire to help their organizations be the best they can be. I think we all have that. I think we all really want the sector and the organizations and the individuals in our sector to be as successful as possible. And so, part of that is, providing good quality resources to be able to provide people with the kinds of training and the kinds of support and coaching and mentoring that will help them be successful. And part of that, again, goes to our previous point of, making sure that there's a real fit between what you're offering and what they need and what they think they need and what. So helping folks understand, through assessments or through, working with, consultants or peers to really understand what their capacity building needs are and what they're ready to tackle, I think is really important. And then providing them with the time and space to be able to do that. But I also think there's some education here. I mean, when we launched our executive coaching program, we had a whole bunch of interest, but we also had some executive directors saying, I don't really have time to do this because I'm putting out fires all the time, and am I really going to have time to kind of sit with a coach for, an hour a week or a couple hours a month, outside? It's going to take me away from my job, and I can't really afford to do that. And part of it is an education to say, this will help you do your job better. If you are able to take some time, away from your desk and away from your email to really sit with someone and kind of prioritize what is it that you as a leader need to focus on, what is it that you need to be able to, be better at this role of being the leader of your organization? Do you need to have a better relationship with your board? Do you need to get better at supervising your staff, and really think through that and have some feedback and some conversations about that? You'll be able to do the other stuff better, and so part of it is really being able to explain and educate people on kind of why this capacity building work is so important, why this particular intervention or strategy, whatever it might be, is really going to be helpful in strengthening their organization.
And it's amazing. It seems as if you were reading JP's mind, because his next question or his next comment is, there are people, who are running these organizations. They don't have time.
Right.
So you obviously anticipated his question. And I think we need to take that seriously, because I think we hear that all the time, right? And I think there is some truth to that. I mean, obviously there's some real truth to that. That, like, how am I going to take time to do, this organizational strengthening work when I've got all these things I need to attend to? And it kind of reminds me of, like, sometimes I feel like I'm too busy to put gas in my car. Well, you can only do that for so long, right? You gotta feed, you gotta feed your leaders, right? You gotta feed your leaders, and I think what we try to do through kind of the work that we're doing is in our capacity building initiative is develop programs that really do that, that kind of help the leaders in our organizations and our organizations themselves, help them get better at what they do. So even though, it's going to take
some time to devote to this leadership program, maybe even a lot of time. Some of our Ladder to Leadership curriculum is very intense and very, time intensive. But at the end of the day, I mean, we're really, it's a transformative program. It's helping emerging leaders, in our nonprofit partners really understand what leadership is all about and take those skills back into their day-to-day work. So again, at some point the car's going to run out of gas if you don't put gas in it. At some point there's going to be burnout. There's going to be, all kinds of not good things for our organizations if we don't attend. If we don't attend to capacity building and organizational strengthening.
Hey, and it was interesting too. I was looking on the Forefront website, and they worked with a group of capacity builders around the Chicagoland area. They generated a report. I forget who was the lead consultant. It might have been TMCC or something.
Yeah,
something like
I was
that.
part of that. Right. There was a cohort of 14 funders that did a landscape analysis of capacity building work across the Chicago area. And it was a study called Point the Way. And it's available on Forefront's website. And it basically looked at, it asked a couple questions. Basically it tried to get a sense of what's the landscape of capacity building support, in the greater Chicago area. What organizations are seeking support, who are not really able to seek support. There was a lot of really fascinating results from that study that really aimed at taking, to take the temperature of what capacity building looked like in the greater Chicago area, both from the perspective of funders, nonprofits, and also consultants who provide capacity building work.
Yeah, and one of the takeaways for me is, so often the temptation, like you mentioned before, is, give us support so that we can develop our development department. And one of the findings was actually it didn't matter what aspect of capacity building the organization engaged in. If they do any sort of capacity building activity, there was like a 10% differential in the amount of funding they were able to raise over time. I thought that was pretty powerful.
Yeah, and I think we see that in our own work, right? I mean, because if you do, for example, a board development work, or let's just say if you provide an executive coach, and the executive coach is struggling with some leadership issues and some issues with their relationship with their board and engaging them at a deeper level, and the coach and the ED kind of work through some strategies on how they can engage the board at a deeper level in the work. Well, that probably is going to engage the board more, who's going to better understand their role, who's going to then be provided with tools on how they can, be more engaged in fund development, which is going to lead to, a better bottom line for the organization and an increase in support, right? So, you didn't start off this saying, I'm going to do like a fund development training. What you started off with was, boy, this ED really needs some support, right? And so you provide a coach to provide that ED with some support, but you end up at a place where the organization is stronger financially because of, the support that you provided that then translated into, better support with their board or with their staff, which then translates into more money, right? So, and I think we can see that, in a variety of different ways. I mean, you could say the same thing about, a board program or, even an HR training where you have staff who feel more supported and no longer burned out, and then are, if you are constantly turnover in your development position, you're not going to have as much, you're not going to have as strong of an annual appeal. But, if you really attend to the function, the HR function, then that will translate too into stronger support for the organization. So, I think that finding, while kind of initially surprising, I think when you really think about it, it makes sense, right? Because if we really attend to the infrastructure of the organization and its leaders and its people, then the whole thing probably is going to, get better, including ultimately, financial support to the organization.
And JP had another question. He says, for example, he works with a bunch of churches, and he has a problem or challenge, shall I say, getting over the trust issues. A lot of the churches he has found don't necessarily like to try anything new. So what strategies would you suggest that people use? If you're new to a position, new to an organization, how do you get people to trust the process, so to speak, the process of capacity building?
Yeah, that is probably a full conference call in of itself, to be honest with you. And I've not worked closely with a bunch of churches or church coalitions, so my statements might be a bit more general, but I think they're probably transferable or generalizable. I think, really, I'm a big believer in kindness, empathy, and transparency. And so, and I think that really is the basis of trust. So for me, I'm not really sure where this, lack of trust is coming from among these groups. When I have worked with organizations, often a lack of trust comes from turf issues or, feeling like we are in competition with others. In some way. And so maybe that's kind of the genesis of what he's talking about here. But I would say that, first of all, whatever issue you're trying to tackle, and I think nonprofits are about tackling the big issues, right? I mean, we're talking about tackling poverty and racism and health and all of these kind of huge social change issues. There's no one organization that's ever going to be able to do that on their own. So there's no one church that's going to be able to, tackle, the social inequalities and social inequities that are present in our society, or no one church that's going to be able to end poverty or any of these big issues that we're talking about. We need to be able to work together and to bring our strengths as organizations and individuals to bear in a collective way so that the whole is greater than the sum of the parts. Now, if you don't have that understanding and you don't have that lack of, then I'm not sure really how you move forward on a capacity building initiative. What I would say is I think sometimes what people do is they try to move too quickly to action before really building that trust. So I would say that, mobilization is really, we do this in our Ladder to Leadership curriculum. There's a whole module put out by the Center for Creative Leadership on boundary spanning leadership. And it's about how to lead across boundaries, whether they be organizational, whether they be cultural, whatever they might be. And the first step is really to understand who you are as an organization or an individual. Like if the example I give is like when you're going in, say your boss says, go to this meeting, and you're kind of put in a position of representing your organization at a meeting. Right? Well, you better pretty well have a good idea of what you can and can't say before you go into that meeting, or it's going to be awfully uncomfortable. So you have to, the first step in being able to understand kind of how you can work with another organization is to really understand your own organization, to understand where the boundaries and fences are within whoever you are representing. What are your non-negotiables? Because you might be put in a situation where somebody asks you to do something and you're really not committed to, you can't do that. You can't, that's not who we are. That's not what I can do. That's not what I can give. So the first step in really, reaching out across boundaries and collaborating, working together with somebody is to really understand who you are. And then it's to bring that to the table in an honest way and say, look, this is what I can do and this is what I can't do. And then I think a critical piece, too, is to get to know each other as individuals. I mean, we need to be more than just the representative of this church and that church. We need to be, Sam and Sarah and Jose and whoever, and see each other as people. And you begin to build those personal relationships, and then it's like, okay, I want you to succeed and you want me to succeed, and then how can our organizations kind of come together? And the next piece is then really finding common ground, and where do our missions and our visions overlap, and what can you bring to the table that I can't, and what can I bring to the table that you can't, and how can we look at this differently so that we could kind of come together and explore new frontiers together. So, I've done a probably inaccurate job of in a very thumbnail sketch way kind of explaining this very rich tapestry of ideas that go into this model called boundary spanning leadership. And JT, I'd certainly encourage you to look up Center for Creative Leadership, Boundary Spanning Leadership. That will kind of provide hopefully a much better description than I just did. But I think, when you ask about organizations that don't trust each other, part of it is I think these organizations, these churches need to understand who they are and what they really want and what they can give and what they can't, and then come to the table and get to know each other as individuals, and then explore, what they each can give to some common goal or common vision about how the world could be a better place.
I love it. I love it. And thank you for that.
Yeah.
And JP says thanks with an exclamation point.
No problem.
Okay, so before we go forward, I want to remind our listening audience that you're listening to Nonprofit U, and we're speaking with Tom Fuechtmann, Senior Program Officer with the Community Memorial Foundation. We are taking questions right now from our listening audience, and if you can call us, the number is 347-884-8121, or if you don't want to call, you can also open a listener-only account and post in our chat room and join the conversation. Okay, so Tom, and I think you touched on this already, but I just want to flesh out just a little bit more. When you talk about providing funding for technical assistance as it relates to things like board development, strategic planning, and the like, you look at the proposals, you want to explore readiness. And one of the things you talked about, obviously, was, their willingness to engage, their board members, their willingness to put their skin in the game financially. Are there other things that you look at in the applicant when you're making a decision as to whether or not to invest in their capacity building activities like strategic planning?
Yeah, so first of all, we want to make sure that this is the right project. So as we've talked about, there'll be some form of an assessment that they that they would reference that would say, this is the project that we really need right now, and this is why. And they'll be able to talk, pretty coherently about, why this is what we need, and why some other project is not what we need, right? So, if they're asking us for strategic planning, be able to provide why you would want strategic, why this is the most appropriate capacity building activity for you to undertake at this time, and then also really how are you going to do that? What is your readiness to be able to take on this task? Who's going to be engaged in this? What is the process going to look like? How are who's going to inform that process? All of these kinds of questions would go into that. We also, as part of our application, require that people interview at least 3 consultants, pick one, and submit their the consultant's proposal along with the application. So we can really see, what the scope of work is. And there have been times when we've received technical assistance, proposals where somebody was asking for, a strategic plan, and you get the consultant's proposal, and it, maybe was a nice, set of conversations, but it really wasn't a strategic plan. And so, you can go back to the organization and say, you're not going to be getting what you think you're going to be getting here, and again, to be able to have that relationship and to be able to have that really robust process to kind of make sure that the organization understands. We've also, done a lot of, support to our grantees in really helping understand, how to contract with a consultant, for example, or, how to determine what their greatest capacity building needs might be at the time. And I think all of that is really important when determining, what the best fit is for, their needs and the project that they might be undertaking.
Mm-hmm. Okay, that's really, really interesting. So I guess I look at the landscape now. Baby boomers for the first time were not the largest segment of the workforce. Now you have millennials who have overtaken us. Do you see any difference in your approaches to grant making as a result of the generational shift?
Yeah, that's a really interesting question. I think that's one that we're all struggling with right now, right? And I think, first of all, the ways in which this is often talked about is a bit concerning to me personally, because I think often the way this is phrased is, what's going to happen when all these baby boomers leave and there's going to be nobody left to replace them? And that's precisely the wrong way to think about it, right? Because there isn't really a deficit of nonprofit leaders. I mean, people will replace them, right? People are out there, who need jobs, who care about our community, who want to make change in the world, and they will replace the baby boomers who are retiring. The big concern to me and to our foundation and others who are engaged in this work is, what we touched upon earlier is that there's a lack of investment in nonprofit leaders. So, I said the stat earlier that only 1% of foundation dollars, over a 10-year period was allocated annually for nonprofit leadership development. And, that's a problem. I mean, that means that that equates to about $29 spent per person on leadership development. Now, businesses spend about $120 per person. So, if you're not investing in leadership development, if you're not investing in people, then we're going to have a problem when, baby boomers retire. But it isn't because millennials are radically different, or because there's all these generational changes in how they see the world. That's some of it. I mean, certainly those kinds of things exist. But I think the bigger problem is we're just not investing in leaders. And so we run into this situation where, and there's a lot of other variables too. I mean, the economy, baby boomers are sticking around longer because they can't afford to retire. And besides which, we're not actually really supporting baby boomers to retire well either. I mean, we're not, part of what we've found in our executive coaching program is executive coaches are really very helpful, as executive directors think about leaving, because one of their big concerns is, how do I leave well? What's my legacy going to be? And I think that's really important when you think about leadership development, is not only thinking about how we train new leaders to take their place, but how we provide off-ramps for, the people who've served in organizations for 20 or 30 years. And how do we really, think about succession planning and sustainability and all these kind of really important things to kind of help our sector, adjust to this major generational shift that's happening. And I think the big problem for me is, not so much that, millennials are radically different in their outlook on the world. I mean, that there's some of that, and some of that's good, but it's really that we're not investing in leaders to be able to kind of look at this change and be very intentional about, helping people succeed in these very difficult environments and in these very difficult, situations that nonprofits are facing.
Okay, and that is a great segue to another question, about your Ladder to Leadership program. I know you mentioned it, but you indicated that you have a program that really helps the mid-career professionals, people, I'm assuming, who work in some other capacity other than nonprofit, and they're changing careers. How does that work?
No, it's for nonprofit professionals. So it's for
Okay.
people who are like development directors or program directors. That's what we mean by mid-career professionals.
Okay.
So
I got
Ladder
you.
to Leadership is a 16-month program that was created by the Center for Creative Leadership, this kind of global leader in leadership development work that's housed in North Carolina. And the program was created through dollars from the Robert Wood Johnson Foundation. And it's a very intense leadership development program that includes classroom learning, executive coaching, mentoring opportunities, and an action learning team approach where a cohort of individuals from different organizations across a community come together on a team and identify a particular challenge that the community is facing, and then develop a program or a project to address that need, that community need, and that project becomes the vehicle by which they learn about leadership. So it's a very intense program. There's also a lot of self-assessment tools that are done because, Myers-Briggs and 360 and, conflict scales and all this, so that you really understand who you are as what you bring to the leadership experience. It's a very intense but, truly transformational program. We've done it twice now, and we're just about to launch our third cohort. And we really believe that, again, if we're going to it's one way that we support, not only the board and the executive directors in our nonprofit organizations, but people, these emerging leaders, these mid-career professionals in our grantee organizations, so that, they have some experiential learning and some experiences that can help them one day move into that C-suite level position, in nonprofit organizations in our communities.
Okay, and do they typically work with your grantees, or are there people who are outside
they
of
work
your
in our
immediate
they are
network?
You have to be a grantee to be able to apply for this program. Each one of our grantees are allowed to put forth one candidate for the program, and they have to have some really interesting discussions about who that candidate should be, and the program is facilitated by two faculty from the Center for Creative Leadership out of North Carolina.
Okay. All right, great. JP has chimed in again from the chat room. He's very interested in that program, and we realize that this is only open to your grantees if people are coming through you. But I get the sense that he probably wants to talk to you some more about that program. He says that program sounds great. Do you have stories about teams who have done this? It would really help a lot of groups if people could see how it's done and or know the people involved. Can you post a link if available, or if just a PDF? His email is jp@do-gooder.us.
Sure. So, JT, so on our website is a description of the program, and that's www.cmfdn.org. Since we now have an application up for it for our grantees, I think we took down the video that we had. We actually did a video on it. But JT, I'll send you that link. We also have some interesting evaluation data. And, JT, when you get my email, feel free to reach out to me, and we can have a much deeper conversation about Ladder to Leadership, because it's been a really incredible program in our community.
Okay, awesome. And that's JP as in Paul. And what I could do is I could send an intro email to you both.
Yeah, please do that. Yep, that will be fine.
And then
I will connect with you.
Nothing gets lost.
Great.
Okay, great. And thank you so much. I know we're winding down. We didn't have a chance to get through everything, but, I just want to get a sense now, and you kind of touched on it throughout the conversation, but in summary, what are some of the lessons that you've learned over the years doing this capacity building work?
So, I really think that, I've said a couple times in this call that investing in leadership is really important, because we believe that investing in people and investing in leadership is what is going to strengthen organizations, and organizations are what fuel social change. And so, to any funders on the call or any nonprofits that are thinking about kind of what kind of capacity building work should we be engaged in, I think leadership development is really, really important. For foundations and others who are engaged in this kind of work, I think talent development and leadership development and even capacity building programs, they really take time to develop. It takes time from foundations. It takes time from nonprofits. Buy-in is really needed at every level. And, as I said before, I think, it's really important to let grantees lead this to some extent. That capacity building that's going to be successful has to be driven by grantees and what they need, rather than kind of from on high what foundations think is needed. And also, I would say be willing to fully engage. This, if we want our grantees to succeed, we need to be able to really help them build their infrastructure, build up their leadership capacity, and build up their organizations. So, but it's only really fully commit to doing that, I think, that, the program grants are going to be successful because somebody has to do that work. And so investing in people and investing in infrastructure is a way that we can also help strengthen our program outcomes. So.
Okay, great. Thank you so much. And JP says, thank you so much again with an exclamation point, and I will make sure I'll make sure I put you guys in contact after the podcast. Okay.
So glad you were listening, JP. Hope others were too.
I always run into people from time to time when I'm out and about who mention, past episodes. So we just never know who's listening. And I don't know if I mentioned to you that this podcast has been downloaded in about 64 countries now. So we really don't know. we don't know who's listening, where they come from, and all that good stuff, because it's downloaded on demand. So I wish I had a way of capturing individuals, but I don't. But I'm just glad to know that there are people listening all over the world, and I just thank you. And I have a feeling that this one will probably be downloaded around the world, given the nature, of what it is we're talking about. Capacity seems to be a big thing.
Wonderful. Wonderful.
Okay.
Well, thank you for inviting me to be part of this. It was a pleasure, and I hope a few of things that I said today are helpful to people in the Chicago area and potentially around the world.
Okay. Yes, indeed. Okay. So we're at the end of the show. Are there any closing comments you have?
I just would like to end with a sense of gratitude, not only to you, Valerie, for being engaged in these kind of conversations and facilitating these kind of conversations, but most importantly to the people who may be listening who are really engaged in this kind of work. And so thank you to all of you out there who are trying to make our world a better place in what you do each day in the nonprofit sector. And thank you to any funders who might be listening who are engaged in helping our nonprofits succeed. And I care deeply about our communities and our sector, and knowing that there are others on the other end of the line that are engaged in this work too just fills me with a great sense of hope and joy. So thank you for facilitating this conversation, and thanks to all who are listening in.
Great. All righty. So, again, I want to thank our listening audience for listening to Nonprofit U. The show will be available for download within about an hour. And be sure to tune in next week when our guest will be Peter Gariepi. He is a CPA, and he's also a candidate for Cook County Treasurer. He's got some really innovative ideas for dealing with nonprofits as well as the social and public sector. And he'll talk about ways to apply lessons learned in social innovation to Cook County government. So that's going to be, I think, a very lively conversation, and I hope you guys can join us. All right, so take care.
All right, thank you. Bye.
Okay, thank you. All right, bye-bye.
a matchup.
And what a team, Mike. Metro PCS and the iPhone SE for $0 on a network that covers 99% of people in the U.S. Oh, impressive.
Play with the best. Switch to Metro PCS on an unlimited LTE plan and get a 32-gig iPhone SE for $0. Metro PCS. Coverage not available in some areas, plus sales tax. Claim based on talk and text. Not valid for active numbers currently on the T-Mobile network or active on Metro PCS in the past 90 days. See store for details and terms and conditions.